بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Good to be back for the last part of the Seerah series, where we're going to be talking about the last days of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as you can imagine, obviously the topic in itself is one that is going to be heartfelt, or at least should be heartfelt. You should feel the emotions, and inshallah I want to try to bring you guys back to how it was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. I want to discuss about his last few days of life, his last words or parting advice that he would give to not just the Sahaba, not just the companions, but to the rest of the Ummah, including us today. We'll discuss a little bit about the actual cause of death. And then, as the Prophet ﷺ moved on and died, we'll talk about the reaction of the companions and how they took that news. And then we'll try to wrap it up with lessons that we should learn from his death. And then we'll try to take an overall comprehensive takeaways of the seerah in a whole. Sounds good? So, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was actually given what you would call a heads up. He was actually given a hint and informed about the fact that his death was coming close. Ibn Umar, he related the ayah, the surah, Surah Al-Nasr, إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. Basically, when this surah was revealed, when the conquest of Mecca, the victory of Mecca had come, and the conquest of Mecca was established, and you see the people entering into the religion in folds, then exalt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with praise and ask forgiveness of Him. Usually after many of the actions, good actions, we follow it up with istighfar. We always seek forgiveness from Allah from any shortcomings that was comprised within that. So the very first, after Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah in our salah and our prayer, we follow it up with 3 words of istighfar. We say astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. Because even though we did something good, there were shortcomings in our acts of worship and the rights that we had to fulfill. Same thing, when we do something bad, we also make istighfar. So what you can take away is that after many of the actions that we do, you make istighfar. When this surah was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, and it was during the days of Eid, just after Hajj, it was known to the Sahaba and to the Prophet himself ﷺ that his death was actually near. And on many occasions, actually the Prophet ﷺ would give his companions a heads up. For example, when he sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal, he sent him to Yemen, and they were walking together on that same path. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was advising me, as Mu'adh was saying, while I was riding on my animal. And so when he finished his advice, he said, Ya Mu'adh, O Mu'adh, perhaps you will not see me again after this year. And perhaps you may pass by my masjid or maybe my grave. And so Mu'adh, as he was hearing those words, he really knew what that meant. That the Prophet's death, ﷺ, was coming close. So he said, I cried out of grief. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he turned and he faced Medina, and he said, the worthiest of my company in the hereafter are the most pious, whoever and wherever they are. Whoever and wherever. Whether they are with me today or they will come years after me. And inshallah, we are among them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that peaceful gathering. One time, Aisha radiallahu anha reported that Fatima, who was Fatima? A nice lady? Yes, she was very nice. Who was Fatima? The daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Aisha was reporting this. She said, Fatima entered the room and she was walking like the Prophet used to walk. Obviously, that's her father. So they had that same manner, that same demeanor of walking. Upon seeing her, the Prophet ﷺ said, "My daughter, welcome." Then he said, "Come and sit close to me." And then he leaned over and whispered a secret into the ears of Fatima. And as she was listening to the secret that the Prophet ﷺ was sharing, she started to cry and she was weeping in tears. So Aisha was asking her, "Why did you cry?" And then she went on. The Prophet continued another secret and whispered into my ears until I started laughing and smiling. So Aisha said, "I remarked that I have never seen happiness and sadness combined so close together as I have seen this day." So then, what do you think Aisha wanted to know? What was that secret? What did the Prophet ﷺ tell you? So she said, "I do not wish to reveal something that was whispered to me by the Prophet ﷺ." After time, after the Prophet ﷺ died and passed away, Aisha remembered that incident when the Prophet was sharing that secret with Fatima. And she said, "You remember that one time when the Prophet was whispering in your ear?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Can you tell me what it was that he whispered?" He said, "First of all, Jibreel alayhi salam, he reviews the Quran with me once every year. But this year, during Ramadan, he reviewed it twice. He reviewed it twice. And I think this is because my death is near. Because my death is near." And then he told her, "And you will be the next one to die among my family." So she said, "Therefore I cried and I was weeping." Then he said, "Let me tell you something else. But are you not happy that you will be the best ladies of all ladies in Jannah?" So she said, "That's why I was laughing." So she laughed out of joy for the news that came from the Prophet ﷺ about the fact that she will be one of the best ladies of all ladies in Jannah. On Monday, the 29th of the month of Safar, in the 11th year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ participated in one of the funeral processions. On the way back, he was starting to complain of his terrible headache that he was encountering. And he said that his temperature rose so high that he felt it just magnified within his head. He said, "Although that happened, I led the Muslims in prayer for 11 days, and the total number of his sick days was either 13 or 14. He had mentioned that the pain grew so much that he remembered that it was from a trace of poison that he had at a place called Khaybar. And he said it was so painful that he said to Aisha, "I still feel the painful effects of eating the food that contained poison. And I feel as if death is approaching me now." Aisha radiallahu anha had mentioned when she heard that, she was starting to get the signs that his life may be coming to an end. So the Prophet ﷺ said, as he was informing her of this news, so he gave her a proposal. And he said to her, "What harm would it be to you?" Meaning, would it be better for you if you die before me? Meaning, you die first. That way, I could pray over you, I could bathe you, and I can bury you. Then she replied, out of her extreme love and jealousy for the Prophet ﷺ, she said, "I swear by Allah that if this were to happen and I died before you, you would only get married to somebody else." And so the Prophet ﷺ looked at her and started to smile. And it was at this point that his sickness started to vamp even more. Abu Sa'id had mentioned that once in a speech, the Prophet ﷺ addressed the people. And he said, Allah has given his slaves two choices between choosing this life and everything it has, or choosing the next life of paradise. And so he said, and that slave has chosen paradise as his choice. And the Prophet ﷺ was speaking in the third term, or very generic or indirect. So upon hearing this, Abu Bakr started to weep and cry. And so the people, not understanding the reason for his tears, they looked at him. Some people thought, what did he get out of that? Kind of confused. But later they discovered that the Prophet ﷺ was actually referring to himself as being that slave and selecting that choice or that option. And then they realized that it was Abu Bakr who knew more about the Prophet than any other man that existed amongst him. And this is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Abu Bakr were very close friends. Out of everybody who rejected him, Abu Bakr was the one who stood by him. When the kuffar of the Quraysh came to him and they said, did you hear what your companion said today? And Abu Bakr said, no. They said, he's claiming that he went all the way to Jerusalem and then went into the heavens. Do you believe such a thing? So Abu Bakr said, if he said it, I believe it. That was the kind of companionship that these two had. Fast forwarding to a day or two prior to his death. When his sickness was overcoming him with pain, and he could not even go out to enter the masjid, the Prophet ﷺ, the one concern he had on his mind, he said, have the people prayed? Did the people perform their prayer? So Aisha said, no, they haven't. They're waiting for you, O Rasulullah. So he said, give me some water so I can wash myself and hope I get some energy so I can go and lead them in prayer. So after he was washing himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he got up, the pain was so intense, he fell down and fainted. He regained consciousness and he asked Aisha, have the people prayed? And Aisha said again, O Prophet of Allah, they're waiting for you to lead them in prayer. So he got water, washed himself again, got up, and what happened? He fainted a second time. It happened a third time, and each time he regained consciousness, he asked Aisha, have they prayed? What do you think the main thing on his mind was? Did the people pray? That's what his main concern. You could imagine putting it in our own sense or in our own terms to understand that when you, for example, studied all night for an exam, or you have a flight to catch, or you have a wedding to attend, and you wake up, the very first thing, the most important thing on your mind will enter your mind that second. When the Prophet had regained consciousness, the most important thing on his mind was his ummah, was his people. And the main concern that he had was if they prayed, So after that happened, he sent Abu Bakr to lead the prayer. And Abu Bakr then started to lead the prayers those days. And Aisha said, it is as if I am looking at the Prophet ﷺ right now. And I can see his feet dragging on the floor because one time he asked his two companions, it was so important for him to attend the masjid, that he asked for his companions to take him to the masjid. He was literally so weak that his 2 feet were dragging on the ground. And when Abu Bakr felt the presence of the Prophet as he was leading the people in prayer, he began to go back. Why? Because he was hoping that the Prophet ﷺ was going to lead them in prayer. But the Prophet signaled for him to continue on, and they sat next to each other as the prayer continued. Anas ibn Malik said that during the sickness of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet did not come out of his home for 3 days. And after this, when the very next prayer was due, Abu Bakr came forth to lead the prayer. The Prophet opened the curtain of his house and he looked at us from within his home. And they said there was nothing more beautiful than seeing his face emerge from behind the curtain. And almost because of that, we almost broke our prayer. After that point, the Prophet gestured or signaled to Abu Bakr to continue and to lead the prayer. He then closed that curtain once again, and the Prophet ﷺ never came out of his house again until he died, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When I talk about the pain that the Prophet had, what is your guesstimation? Was it easy? Was it tough? And think about it, that the Prophet Muhammad is the best of all creation. Was it an easy pain, or was it very difficult on him? What thoughts come into your mind? Tough or easy? It was very difficult. And you don't want to say that in my own life, if God protect us from any illness or sickness or any disaster or tribulation or hardship, but if it were to fall upon us, never ever think that this is because Allah doesn't love you. Never think that Allah is mad at you, therefore this has happened to you. This is the tactic of shaitan. When things do happen in your life, realize it's a means of cleansing your sins. And there will be some people who will be tested with hardships time and time again until they meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. And they see mountains of reward. And they ask, oh Allah, what is all this reward from? It's from all the trials that you used to face in your life. To such an extent that the person would wish they had more. We don't seek pain. We don't want things to be hard. But if it were to fall upon us and Allah tested us, it's not because He doesn't love you. It's not because He hates you or He's mad with you. It's only because He's testing you. And when you pray to Allah and He doesn't respond, once again, it's not because He hates you or doesn't love you. If I was your teacher today and I gave you an exam, the slave is being tested while the teacher is silent. Allah is almost the same way. Allah will test you and then He will watch you to see how you respond with that test. Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, I have never seen anyone go through such pain which was more harsher than what the Prophet ﷺ was going through. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he said, I went to see the Prophet, I visited him ﷺ, and I found him suffering from such intense pain. So I put my hand onto him and I said, O Messenger of Allah, indeed you're suffering such intense pain. So he replied, yes, I suffer twice or double the amount of any one of you. So he was shocked upon hearing that. So then Abdullah bin Mas'ud said, will you get double the reward? So he replied, yes. Then he said to me, Allah will remove sins just as a tree sheds its leaves. For any Muslim who is afflicted with sickness or any tribulation that befalls him. So if you see a Muslim who has cancer or who's stuck in the hospital and you think, what a horrible way to end your life, we don't know the exchange of good deeds and sins that is shedding from his account. Aisha radiallahu anha had mentioned, when the Prophet was on his deathbed, I saw him dipping his hands into a bowl of water, and then he would wipe his face with it. And he would say, Oh Allah, help me through these hardships and the agonies of death. Anas had mentioned when the Prophet became so ill, he began to lose consciousness. So his daughter Fatima said within her own self, what extreme pain my father is going through. What extreme pain my father is suffering. So the Prophet, overhearing his own daughter saying this, and he said to her, your father will never suffer again after today. What were those last words that the Prophet gave to his ummah before he departed? There's no doubt that everything in the life of the Prophet that he shared with us is full of wisdom. Whether it was a warning, an encouragement, and a piece of advice during his sickness. But he gave some special advice to his whole entire nation, his whole entire ummah during his sickness, just as he was going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Aisha said that the Prophet ﷺ said to his whole ummah, he said, don't do what the Christians and the Jews have done with their prophets' graves and have made them places of worship. So he said, do not take my grave as a form of prostration, or as a place to prostrate. Then she said, and she continued, had the Prophet not had said that, I would have been afraid that the people would have done exactly what the Prophet was saying, warning his people about taking his grave as a place of worship. But then she said and remarked, but I'm afraid they're going to do that anyway. And that's 100% true. If you go to Medina, you'll find the mashayikh, the religious guys who are standing by the grave of the Prophet, and they're seeing people who are doing acts of worship or praying or directing their dua. The Prophet ﷺ as a man has died. As a legacy, it still continues to live. But the forms of worship do not go to any man, not even the Prophet Muhammad himself ﷺ. They go to only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After offering that advice, look, and we talked about this in the last lecture. Who can remind me what was the topic of last week's lecture? Forgiveness. He said, as he was sick, as he was going to die, he said, anyone who I have injured, or that I may have inflicted pain on them, he said, whoever I lash their back, I offer him my back to revenge, as an avenge for himself upon me. He said, whoever I dishonored, here I am offering my honor so that he may avenge himself. Then he descended and he prayed the noon prayer. And after he returned, he sat on the pulpit and he resumed his first speech about enmity and some other things. So a man had the audacity to claim, O Prophet of Allah, you owe me 3 gold coins. You owe me 3 dirham. The Prophet ﷺ is about to die. And here he is trying to collect 3 gold coins. So the Prophet ﷺ did not rebuke him, did not get upset with him. He simply said to his servant, go ahead and pay him his money. Sa'id ibn Jubayr had mentioned Thursday. If only you knew what happened on Thursday. Then he cried until the ground beneath him was wet. So Ibn Abbas said, Sa'id asked him, what happened on Thursday? He replied, the sickness of the Prophet became so severe that he started to ask the people, bring me something that I can have the people write upon. And this was more of a sensitive topic, and we'll discuss the details in a bit. So he said, I want you guys to write something on a bone of an animal, anything, just bring it, so that way I can give you some words of advice. So the people around him began arguing as to whether it should be written down or not, because there were strict rulings for the companions only to write down the words of what? The words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to mix up the two. So as they were arguing in front of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said, leave me alone, for I'm heading to a better situation, having seen the good things that Allah has prepared for me than what these men are arguing about. Basically, it's better for me not to spend some time with this unfruitful dispute. Then the Prophet commanded, reward your guests with gifts just as I used to do, and hold fast unto the Qur'an. Salama had mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, his last words of advice was guard your prayers. Guard your prayers. And watch over what your right hands possess. Your prayers, we know them. They're the 5 daily prayers. And as students, that's something that we should really take to heart. As people who are working 8 to 5 jobs, same thing. Take the words of the Prophet ﷺ to heart. The 5 daily prayers is what the Prophet ﷺ had stressed to the people before he died. And I get it. It's tough. It's challenging. Our schedules are always, jam-packed with so many different things. But never lose that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We worry about cell phone reception dying out. Worry about the heart and your connection with Allah dying out. We're more worried about the battery health of our phone than the health of our hearts and the connection that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So guard your prayers. And if you're praying 5 times a day, alhamdulillah, good, but keep it that way. If you're not praying 5 times a day, or you're doing what you can, improve in that. Make sure you have that checkbox. You do what you can to make sure you're doing your 5 daily prayers. And if you're not praying at all, time to start, inshallah. This is the opportunity to start. As they say, pray before others pray on you. Pray before you have no other opportunity to pray. The last day of the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr was leading the prayers during the sickness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. On a Monday during the sickness, while the people were praying, the Prophet pulled back his curtain and stood just watching his companions praying. They said his face was intensely illuminating, and he started to smile despite his sickness. And we almost broke our prayer out of the joy of seeing his beautiful face, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So once again, Abu Bakr began to retreat from behind, thinking that the Prophet was going to emerge and come out of his home. But the Prophet signaled for us to continue. Then he closed the curtain that day, and he died that same day. Some state that he died at the end of the day, some state that he died in the afternoon of that day, and some say that he died towards sunrise. The Prophet's last breaths. When the pangs of death started, Aisha grabbed the Prophet ﷺ and started to lean his head upon her chest. And Aisha said that one of the blessings that Allah bestowed upon me is that the Prophet died in my home. Do we know where Aisha's home is today? Yes? No? Yes, in Medina, right? You know the green dome? That's the Prophet's home, or in that vicinity. So she said, he died between my chest and neck while he was leaning against me. Allah had mixed his saliva with mine at the time of his death. And she explained that what happened was that Abdurrahman, the son of Abu Bakr, he came with a miswak in his hand. And while the Prophet was leaning against me, I noticed that his eyes were sort of communicating with me. And he was looking at the siwak, the toothbrush, what have you. And so I asked the Prophet ﷺ, would you like the siwak for you? So he nodded. So weak, he could not even talk. So I took the siwak and I gave it to him. But I noticed the bristles were a little bit too hard. So I asked him, shall I soften it for you? So he once again nodded. So I used my saliva, as Aisha is saying, used my saliva as it was soft and moist. Then I gave it to the Prophet ﷺ, and he started to brush his teeth with it. Aisha is thinking that one of the blessings of Allah is that the last thing in his mouth wasn't water, it wasn't food, it was some of her saliva in his mouth, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To remember these type of details is a testament to how much she loved him. She loved him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then he put his hand in water and he wiped his face with it one more time, and he said, La ilaha illallah. Death is full of pain. And as he finished his siwak, he raised his hand and his finger up, and he looked and he gazed towards the heavens, and he moved his lips, and I saw him trying to utter something. So she said, I bent down to hear what he was saying. And he started to say, with those whom you have bestowed your grace with the prophets and the truthful ones, the martyrs and the good doers, O Allah, forgive me and have mercy upon me and join me with the highest companionship. Anas said, Allah continued to send down revelation after revelation to the Prophet until he died, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the most revelation that he ever received in one day was towards the time of his death. Then at intervals he uttered those words, the most exalted companionship. I ask you, Allah. To Allah we return, and to Him we turn back for help, and for Him is the last abode. This event took place on a Monday, the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal, in the 11th year of the Hijrah calendar. How old was he when he died? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Huh? 63? Anybody else? I'm just buying time to get some water here. He was 63 years old, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Although there is somewhat of a, others had other opinions that he was 65. Some say that he was 60. They used to round off the years. So if he was 63-ish, they would say he's 65. But as it was mentioned that he was 63 years old, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Now the Prophet ﷺ has entered that last stage and has entered the hereafter. Now let's take a look at how the companions reacted to that news. So the great loss was soon known by everyone in Medina. Dark grief had just spread and engulfed all areas and horizons. Anas said, I have never witnessed a day better or brighter than the day in which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came to us, and I have never witnessed a day more sadder, more depressing, more awful than the one on which the Prophet ﷺ died. Ibn Rajab said, when the Prophet died, the entire Muslims were in a state of shock and confusion. Some of them were bewildered. Others were shocked and started to get things mixed up. Others literally dropped to their knees. And others were unable to stand. While many of them refused to even believe the news that the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. So Umar, when he started to hear those news, he was so stunned, so shocked, utterly angered at the news that he lost his mind. He lost consciousness. And he stood before the people and he addressed them all and shouted that whoever is saying that Muhammad ﷺ is dead, he will come back and he will chop off all your arms and legs for whoever is trying to spread such words. Abu Bakr wasn't there at that time. So he finally arrived. He dismounted his animal. And before addressing Umar, he went straight to the Prophet ﷺ. And at this time the Prophet had passed away. And he was covered by a cloth. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anh took the cloth, uncovered the face of the Prophet, looked at his face, knelt down, gave him a kiss, and he started to cry. And he was crying. And he said, I would sacrifice my father and my mother for your sake. You are just as fragrant after your death as you were during your life. I swear by the one in whose hand my soul is in, you will never die twice. Then he went out to face the people. And he said, and raised his voice, O the one who is shouting, O you who is swearing by Allah. He was addressing Umar. He said, calm down. So when Umar saw that Abu Bakr was here, Umar sat down. So Abu Bakr then radiallahu anh, praised Allah and thanked him. And then he said in those famous words, whoever was worshipping Muhammad, then Muhammad is dead. And whoever was worshipping Allah, then Allah is alive and will never die. Then he recited the verse, إِنَّكَ مَيِّتُونَ وَإِنَّهُمْ مَيِّتُونَ. That indeed you Muhammad are to die, and indeed they are to die as well. And he recited another verse, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. He said Muhammad is not but a messenger. Other messengers have passed away before him. So if he was to die or to be killed, would you turn back on your heels and leave Islam? And he who turns back on his heels and leaves Islam does not do any harm to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ibn Abbas said, by Allah, when Abu Bakr was reciting these verses, people acted as if they never heard them at all. And then they started to repeat the same verses just to ingrain it in their hearts, so that no one was left who was not reciting those verses. Umar said, by Allah, as soon as I heard Abu Bakr reciting those verses and giving that speech, he said, I knew it was true. He said, I fell down to the ground. I felt my legs was so wobbly and weak. I collapsed and I was unable to carry myself, because only then did I realize that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had really died. Fatima radiallahu anha, the daughter of the Prophet, cried at the death of the Prophet and said, "Oh my father, how close you are now to your Lord, and al-Firdaus, paradise, is your final abode." Anas said, I see the Prophet in my dreams every single night except for the odd ones. And whenever I don't see him in my dreams, I break down in tears. And he would cry as he was saying this. Bilal, who was Bilal? The famous mu'adhin, right? Who was the mu'adhin since the time of Medina. He had traveled to Syria. When he came back and the Prophet ﷺ was dead, ﷺ, they wanted him to give the adhan, but he refused, because every time he came to Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, he would break up in tears. So one time in Medina, he gave the adhan for the first time since the Prophet's death. People woke up to that adhan thinking that the Prophet ﷺ was still alive. Imagine this one question here. Fatima asked Anas. Anas was one of the companions who had buried the Prophet ﷺ. Anas Fatima looked at Anas and she said to him, "Oh Anas, how did you find it in your heart to throw soil over the Prophet's body ﷺ? How did you manage to bury a man like him ﷺ? How did you manage? They used to do everything for him. They would sacrifice their own body, health, and wealth for him. How could you even manage and put dirt over the Prophet's body ﷺ?" So eventually this news started to spread and the companions realized just exactly what had happened. And that's why Anas said that he has never experienced a day more sadder, filled with grief, than the day on which the Prophet ﷺ passed away. They were even saying that it sounded like the sounds of Hajj, because people were wailing so much that when you go to Hajj, you hear people saying the talbiyah, labbaik Allahumma labbaik, and so on and so forth. And there was the thoughts that it was almost like it was Hajj all over again, because they heard the people, the sounds of wailing that was covering the whole city of Medina. Then they started to discuss exactly where does the Prophet get buried. And a disagreement started to arise. So Abu Bakr had mentioned that a dead Prophet is buried in the place in which he dies. So literally Abu Talha lifted the body of the Prophet, somebody removed the mattress, and they started to dig underneath in that same spot. And they were cutting into the ground, and they slowly lowered the Prophet's body sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some lessons that we can take from this, and I know, subhanAllah, that there's more to be said, but time is short and we don't have much of it. But in the month of Rabi al-Awwal, we have a few things that have happened. One, as some people have said, the Prophet was born in that month. And like we learned today, the Prophet died in that month, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And also the hijrah, the migration from Mecca to Medina, took place. Unfortunately, we have a common trend, and it's very sensitive because people take it really to heart when it comes to Mawlid and celebrations and what have you. But we have to look back at what did the Prophet, the companions do? Did the Prophet ever call for these celebrations to take place? Did the companions ever celebrate or signal out one single day and have the parades and everything like that take place? Because this is almost a form of imitation from other religions, as we can see nowadays. But if you were to compare his life, his birth with his death, what would you guys say that is more significant? I don't know if I gave you guys the answer to this 2 weeks ago, but if I did, I'm testing your memory at this point. What has more significance? His birth or his death? What do you guys think?
His birth?
Can I ask you why?
I was reading about some things that happened on the day that something was born.
Yeah.
And there was a miracle that happened. There was a fire somewhere that had been burning for like 1,000 years that had been extinguished. There was a lake that dried up, or that dried up or something. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good one. Lot of important events, as you mentioned, had occurred during the time the Prophet was born, directly and indirectly. But let me tell you this: when a prophet is born, he has a message, he delivers it. He's a messenger. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, same thing, had a message, he delivered it. When Prophet Ibrahim or Musa alayhi salam, they died. When they died, another prophet was to come after them, and the revelation were to continue, and so on and so forth. Their prophethood ended, but prophecy did not. Prophethood ended when those prophets died, but prophecy did not end. Okay? When the death of the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet ﷺ died, this ended and cut off every single revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to any other prophet that will come after him. So there's more significance in that sense when you look at the death of the Prophet. Because we've had many prophets that we know, prophets that we don't know, messengers that we know, messengers that we don't know. But the message, the prophecies were to continue. And so, a lot of those occurrences have happened, but when the Prophet died, that was it. The seal of the prophethood was done. The Prophet ﷺ said, and I remember I mentioned this, that he said, if any believer is afflicted with a disaster, then let him remember the disaster of my death, so that this may give him ease, as nobody will be afflicted with a disaster which is greater than that of my death. So obviously remembering a greater disaster wipes out the effects of a smaller one. And what greater disaster is there in comparison to the Prophet's death? And we do that within our own lives, right? We compare a lot, and we should do the same, that when we look at ourselves with people who are more fortunate, we shouldn't do that. We should be looking at people who are less fortunate, which brings about contentment, happiness, tranquility. One Ayman, just to exemplify the fact of that significance of his death, she said that I swear by Allah that I knew the Prophet would die one day. But the reason why I'm crying now is because Allah will stop the revelation from descending. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will stop the revelation from descending. So this is in a snapshot, some of the takeaways of his death. And I actually suggested this topic just for the fact that, to really appreciate and love somebody, you got to know everything about that person. And this is sometimes not a topic that you would often hear much about. And so this is why I felt that it's something different, but something that is actually needed. And we'll actually see how close you are with somebody like the Prophet ﷺ. Questions, comments, reflections, feedback. Share some takeaways. What did you guys have? Yes?
How would you describe celebrating or not celebrating the Mawlid? Like a gathering at the masjid, like
So,
Eid Salah and all that?
yeah, so So technically speaking, we have two Eids in Islam, Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha. What a lot of people will do is, they will reserve a banquet, and in the name of the Prophet ﷺ, they'll have a Mawlid. They'll straight up call it, celebrating his life or whatever, Mawlid celebration. Once again, anytime we do an action, we ask the question, why am I here? Why do I drive from where I drive, Elk Grove, to here? Why do I go through that? Because I seek Allah's reward and His pleasure. I've committed sins, I ask Allah to forgive them. So I'm doing whatever I can in hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with my actions. Now, if I were to tell you that we pray 5 times a day, that's great. If I were to come to you and say, it's better if you pray 6, you say, whoa. You say, where do you get that from? Right? You would have to question me in that regards. So when it comes to acts of worship, the proof is on me to give you the evidence of it, right? I can't just come from my pocket and say, let's do this type of action and say that it's noble and there's a value to it, unless I have some type of evidence for it. So when it comes to the Mawlid in particular, this is why I did say it's kind of sensitive, because it's when people say we shouldn't celebrate the Mawlid or single out one single day and have a Muslim gathering, and if you want to do that, we should technically do that every day. I know that's the whole Mother's Day. Well, Mother's Day is every day. Okay, I get that as well. But at the same time, this is an act of worship. Therefore, we should have proof. So what do those look like? I don't even use the word Mawlid in my in my vocabulary. My terms of definition is very limited, and I just stick with whatever the Prophet and his companions did it. What I would often ask, and I gave this in one masjid, and I'll be honest, when I did it, I knew I was going to be questioned about it. Not to say it's bad, but somebody was waiting for me outside, and he kind of course. And as I went there, and I knew it was coming, but I said, if it was something that was good to do, then the companion should have been the first ones to do it. And if it is something that we should be doing, then bring your proof so I can celebrate with you. That's all I need. And I'll be the first one doing whatever else is done in that kind of case as well. Make sense? You have another follow-up with that? Okay. Anybody else have a follow-up with that? Yes. Say that again?
Did he have a counterclaim, or was it?
No, it just, and I mean, the conversation was heated because, if we're talking about religion, then let's get to the evidence, right? So when I asked him for it, he couldn't do it other than saying, well, we should love the Prophet. Of course we should. But we cannot say that we love the Prophet, therefore I'm going to worship his grave. I can't do an act of worship. I can't expect to get closer to Allah when the Prophet never did it himself, right? These acts that are innovative. Innovations are great. Cell phones, amazing. But acts when it comes to worship, that's a different story, right? We stick with what the Prophet came with. We don't, otherwise it's an insult to what the Prophet, because did the Prophet not do his job, right? Prophecy, he gave us all good and laid it out. And he told us what was bad and he laid it out. So for me to now tell you something new that the Prophet never, remember when it comes to acts of worship, I need to bring you proof. If somebody says water is haram, okay, in terms of like food and consumption, everything is halal, unless only the things that Allah said that are haram, pork, alcohol, are haram. So if somebody gives you some fancy chemical that's in a food and says it's haram, okay, that's fine. What is your proof for that? Because in terms of worldly consumptions, we're allowed to eat and drink and do everything. Okay, you can go to Safeway, no problem. But there's a small list that Allah said that is haram, that the Prophet ﷺ said is haram. I cannot modify, add, unless I have the proof to do so. Otherwise, any action that is done not in accordance with the Prophet's tradition is simply rejected. Yes?
So, would your definition of an act of worship be like a big sort of party or celebration on the Prophet's birthday? And so that would be sort of a no-go in your book. But if you were to, take this opportunity, Mother's Day is supposed to be every day, right? But that one day is like, okay, I should remember my mom, especially this day. So if you take that opportunity to remember the Prophet ﷺ, maybe try to incorporate more in your life from that point forward.
Yeah.
So would that be something that you would not agree with, or?
So there's a couple things, okay? If we do an act and it's a consistent basic, Eid comes from the word a'id, or something that is often repeated, okay? So Eid is often repeated, happens after every Ramadan, right? That's a continuous cycle. Now let me give you an example. If I were to do an act of worship that is from the Sunnah, but I said that it's a must for me to do that acceptable act at a specified time, and I do that all the time, then that becomes very questionable, because it's almost like it's a tradition now, you see? The traditions that we follow are the prophets, not our own ones that are made up. In the sense of Mawlid or Mother's Day, I mean, let's be honest, we fall short when it comes to Mother's Day, right? I feel insulted, I feel bad when I have to have a day to force myself to recognize my mom or to buy her something, you know? I say, you know, and that's the one claim that I use, is that, you know what? Okay, Mother's Day is a great thing. Every day is Mother's Day. Every day is a day for giving thanks, you know? But why do we restrict it to these traditions that were never utilized in the past? When we get into those kind of customs, then we're starting to get into these doubtful matters that really beg to ask, yeah.
No, so yeah, I'm not disagreeing with your point. I'm saying that what if you would use it as sort of catalyst for yourself, right? And I'm not saying.
No, I got you.
I'm not saying like give extra.
Let me give you a point. Let me give you.
Sense on what more on that day or something.
Yeah.
Like, try to do that more in the future.
Yeah.
You know, use it as a catalyst. Kind of thing.
I got you. So for example, what month are we in? Islamic calendar? Rabi'ul Awwal, right? So often people will talk about the Prophet ﷺ in this month. Now, is it fixed? There's nothing wrong with that. Is the topic fixed to a certain day? Like, did I get invited on a certain Rabi'ul Awwal this day? Not necessarily, right? It's an open-ended. People who, well, there's a couple people. People insist on celebrating the Prophet's birth on a day that is signified as the day he was born. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is that there's a lot of doubt in terms of the exact day that he was born. Some even say he was born in Ramadan. So can we then, you can use that, I know what you're saying. Can you use it as a form of a catalyst, a motivation? How would I give this, how would I break it down is that try to use not just this, but more than that. You know what I mean? That way you're not just pinpointing it just to that specific thing. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
We can discuss more, inshallah. Other thoughts, comments, questions? How many people are going to be waiting for me outside? That's the question. Can you guys give me some takeaways, just overall of the whole entire lecture? Yes?
I'm not sure if I never heard it or if I just forgot, but like just being reminded and knowing that like the Prophet like sallallahu alaihi wasallam suffered while he was dying as well, and that he wasn't above being in pain through that process.
Mhm.
He wasn't just because he was a prophet, didn't mean Allah like gave him a freebie and was like, oh, you'll die peacefully in your sleep. Like he was the best of mankind, he did no wrong yet, he still suffered tremendously in his death. And so I like the point that you made where it's like don't think that every single time something bad happens to you that like it's a punishment for something because the Prophet had nothing to
For sure.
for it yet. He
For
still went
sure.
through that tremendous pain.
You know, the Prophet ﷺ used to sleep on a straw mat. Very harsh, you know, and this was the Prophet. Umar came to him and said, "You're the Prophet of Allah. Why are you sleeping on the ground in this way?" The Prophet ﷺ, he lived his life not above anybody else's means, right? And there were many days where the Prophet would be starving. He would be fighting hunger. And so the Prophet wasn't this elevated prince or king that had the most joyous life and then he gets a free ticket to Jannah. What the Prophet, the way he lived his life was that he showed us the value of Jannah by going through all the work and hardship that he lived through. What other takeaways you guys have? Yes.
When you were describing how Aisha radiallahu anha felt when she had the Prophet ﷺ on her chest, and the way you described how she had shared the Islam, and subhanAllah, that story I think really resonated with me because even like saliva that share with someone else, but to us, the Prophet ﷺ is so beloved that even for us to, like for Aisha, radiallahu anha, to share her saliva with the Prophet ﷺ, she took that as something that she remembered, and the story still resonates with us today.
SubhanAllah. Well said. Oh. If you scratch your forehead or you touch your ear, I'm going to think you're raising your hand. What does learning about his life do to you? What type of inspirations does it spark in your hearts, or forms of motivation does it give you? These talks are not just entertainments. They're stuff that, and I've given so in the 3 series, and this is the end, so shed as many tears as you would like. But what takeaways do you have from it? And even when you give a lecture and you only can remember 10%, but you only took away 1%, and you actually changed your life with that, that's very good. That's production right there. That's change. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. You hear a message, it doesn't go in one ear, out the other. It actually, revitalizes something. It makes you want to be a better person. Whether it's through the forgiveness, and we discussed that, I think, in length, what it takes to forgive somebody and what it means to forgive somebody. The Prophet's literally dying, and he wants to make sure he's forgiven everybody, but he wants to give others the opportunity to also forgive him for any quote-unquote wrongdoings that he's done to others. I mean, that tells you so much, What kind of inspiration does it give you?
If you want to become like someone, you should first learn your life and then to implement it.
Good. Now, you can't become something without learning it, right? If the Prophet is that role model, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then there should be that strive or that drive to try to model that person. What else? Yes.
I think the realization that, like, subhanAllah, I think we kind of talked about it last time, but this concept of, like, in the society that we live in, a certain kind of personality is kind of pushed because we live in an individualistic society where it's like, think for you, put yourself first, stand up for yourself, and like all that kind of mentality, the kind of fight mentality, and that's kind of idealized right now.
Mm-hmm.
But like to recognize that, like, no, it's the exact opposite. Islam preaches that we try to follow, and like we follow Muhammad's model, and that reminder. It's like, and the examples that go along with it, and like the proof of why it's so much better is like it's a nice refreshing reminder.
Yeah. Always ask yourself, what would the Prophet do in that case? You're having either a battle between you and another person, or you and yourself, your own ego. Sometimes we're really stubborn. What would the Prophet do? And don't think twice and just march on, move on, have that resolve. Yeah.
I think all the lectures and taught me one very important detail that regardless of who the Prophet was dealing with, he gave everybody the same devotion and attention and care. And that too often we look at, like, in our society, we look at people based on what we can only see. We don't see, like, what they're possibly going through. And, like, we base those judgments off of that. So I think it's good to get examples of people that only base what they can see that's positive.
Yeah. Sometimes we're so busy with looking at life through our lenses that we don't understand where that other person's coming from. Sometimes I get people barking at me, and boy, do I want to bark back. But I just tell myself, you know what? Think about it. He may be having a bad day. Something probably, you don't know if the person's going through a divorce, maybe got an F on their test. You name it. There could be something that, from their perspective, that you don't know that's troubling them, hence their response. Is it justified? No. But then again, it helps you deal with these different people and these different emotions. Because human beings are difficult, We just, we clash with one another, and then the next day everything's okay. Or maybe it's not. But The Prophet ﷺ, he dealt with so much at so many different times, and he was dealing with so many different characters, but he had his own personalized, custom-made way of dealing with this person and dealing with that person, you know? So try to take that in consideration. It's not about how big your beard is. It's not about, you know, and it's getting there, mashallah. But, you know, as I said that he was rubbing his beard, or the other brother was. But it's really, start with your heart. Your heart controls your limbs. It controls a lot of the things that you say. If you have a good heart, your actions will also be good as well. So fix what's inside and it'll produce what's on the outside. What other takeaways you guys have? You know, for me, I just put myself back into that scene of when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. You know that they loved him so much, and what was it like when he was breathing his last breath, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? To me, that really hits hard, you know? Like, you love your family, and never do you want to see them go. And the Prophet Muhammad was the main family member of their life, right? There was no blood bond, but there was a huge bond or connection with him. So I always tell myself, like, what was it like during that time? It must have been so heavy. How did they even get up in the next morning and live their life? I don't know. Well, you do know some, but they used to write poetry about how beautiful the Prophet looked. They used to write poetry saying, I looked at his face and I looked at the moon, and by Allah, his face was brighter than the moon. Like, the comparisons that they used about the beauty that the Prophet embodied, both internally and externally, was better and far superior than anything else that they ever witnessed in their entire life. And to say such amazing and in-depth words about this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then to have to put dirt onto his body and to bury him, that to me, I cannot fathom it. I can't comprehend it. I don't know what that's like. You know, you walk, anybody been to Medina and you walk next to the Prophet's grave? You get chills, you know, you don't even know what to do. You just stand there, you're almost in awe. And then you look to the next person, he's like, what do I do right now? It's heartwarming, you know, because you're actually that close to him. Not fun fact, real fact. Did you know people try to steal the body of the Prophet ﷺ? There's been major attempts to steal the body of the Prophet ﷺ. They went as far as digging underground tunnels and going hundreds and hundreds of yards underneath, and then digging upwards, taking the body and trying to go out. So guess what they did? They built steel walls that go actually all the way down, so that way people cannot dig. Just thought that was interesting.
How far did they get in the attempt?
That's a good question. I don't think they didn't get far enough, so alhamdulillah. Actually, subhanAllah, one of the stories that when a person was digging, they would show their face in the society, and then one of the scholars actually had a dream of a person attempting to steal the body of the Prophet. He was discovered that way after the scholar confronted that person of a dream he had, so he kind of confessed, and that's how one of the cases ended there. But I found it was just interesting. Yes. For many of the prophets, the tradition is wherever they die, they're buried in that locality. Even though the graveyard al-Baqi' is very close by, but prophets are buried in the land, city area that they were buried. So Abu Bakr took it to that level and said, let's bury him right in that spot. And that's where he was buried. You know, the earth does not consume the bodies of the prophets. Did you guys know that? So, or shuhada, people who are killed in the way of Allah. When you say shuhada, this is not people who are just purely fighting. This is people who died from stomach illness or stomach cancer, or people who died in there's a lot of different forms of being a shaheed. And so some of the shaheeds, that when people are excavating and digging and they come across a body, one time they came across a person who was very truthful and very pious, and they said, oh, subhanAllah, somebody was buried here. It was as if he was buried just hours ago. But they realized he was buried, who knows how long ago, because he was still warm to the touch. The flesh, everything is still intact. That's more food for thought for everybody there. Any other inspirations before? And think about the very first lecture that we gave, just about describing the Prophet, and that was a lot. I just kind of over, a broad perspective of his life. But any closing comments? What does it do for you in a person? Well, you don't have to answer that question because you raised your hand before I asked that question.
Sort of tying into that. Like when you learn about the Prophet ﷺ and the kind of person that he was, you sort of then get into reading about the kind of people that he inspired and the kind of people that were drawn to him and what he produced in terms of like a generation. You have people like scholars and warriors and things like that. And you sort of like this one thought has been in my head for like the past couple of days about how because of alhamdulillah, the blessing that we have as Muslims, we have this sort of heritage that we can tap into, and you see the people that came before you, and you can almost see that as like a depressing thing, like I'll never be as good as them. But if you look at it as almost like a challenge, almost like an air, like between you and Allah. Like Allah wants to see how good you can be as a person.
Mm-hmm.
I think viewing your faith similar to that, it almost fires you up. It inspires you to do the dirty work, to do the things that people don't want to do, to help out when no one else is helping out. And I think it's really powerful.
It's good. Nice. Well said. When people embrace Islam and you have a convert, you mentioned heritage, or we have some, maybe we have a brother who's religious, or mashallah, he's changed his life from 180 degrees and turned it around, and he used to do ABC, and now mashallah, he's praying. And it's not all about outward actions, it's also internally. As I mentioned, the heart is, the speech and all that. People become religious and they talk down onto other people. That's not religious, that's arrogance maybe. But keep in mind that, we do have something to tap into, some, maybe uncle who, mashallah, is an inspiration, a nearby one. You probably have a younger brother or maybe a nephew or cousin who's, mashallah, memorized the entire Quran, and you're like, wow, I can never do that. You're selling yourself short. Put it this way, even with reverts who just embrace Islam, the number one thing I like to tell them is that, all the companions were reverts, right? They converted into Islam, not knowing anything. And they took it one day at a time. Yeah, they had a great teacher, but at the same time, they still learned Islam just like any one of us. And there's even reverts who are an inspiration, not Arab speaking, the typical American guy, but mashallah, they change their life. They go to Medina or wherever to seek knowledge. They come back and are giving lectures. And are you from Syria? No, you're from Lebanon. No, I'm from Texas. It's like, oh, wow. So even they can become inspiration for us. So sometimes you don't have to really search too far back for a role model or some type of motivation or leader in that sense. They're even around us as well. Going once, going twice. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I'll leave you guys with one last thought or one last comment. The Prophet ﷺ, he actually mentioned to the companions that you will be with the ones whom you love on the day of judgment or in Jannah. When the companions had heard that you'll be with the ones whom you love, what do you think they thought? He's like, we're going to be with you, O Prophet of Allah. Don't sell yourself short. If you love the Prophet ﷺ, inshallah, look forward to having that gathering with the Prophet ﷺ. But that love there has to be some quality and quantity to that. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to gather all of us with our Prophet ﷺ on the day of judgment and in Jannah. We say Ameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.